So we're turning now to the first of the two big debates, where, as promised, I just know this is going to get very lively. Our first motion is this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. Now, there's food for thought. The debate will be hosted by the Literific, debating at Queen's, the university's historic debating society, and chaired by Professor Kevin Brown. The format will see two teams present arguments for and against with audience feedback and your vote at the end to decide who made the most persuasive case. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to the debaters. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mandy. My name is Daniel DeBelly, and I'm the president of the Literary and Scientific Society of Queen's University Belfast. And can I just say that it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for attending today. So just first, a bit about our society. We are the oldest society on Queen's. We were founded in 1850, so we had our 175th anniversary this year. We're also one of the most active societies on campus, and you'll see in the tables in front of you there, we have our term card of all the exciting motions that we will be discussing and have already discussed this year. And on the other side as well, you'll notice that there are events that we're taking part in, events, socials, and of course our great debates, of which this is one. And then also at the Literific, we're very big on discussion and discourse. And actually how we got involved with Victim Support NI. So last year we had the pleasure of having Victim Support NI as our charity, so we were involved in fundraising for them. And this year, can I just say on behalf of our society that we are incredibly delighted to be here today, to be involved in such a fantastic event. I think the work that we try to do and the work that Victim Support NI try to do are very similar, and it's kind of culminated in this event today because there are three key things that you need to know about a debate before we get started. The first is, and it's already been alluded to, that everyone has a voice, everyone has a seat at the table, and as a society that promotes debate and free speech on campus, that's something that's very important to us. That all the speakers that you see today at this podium will have 7 minutes where you will hear their own experiences and examples drawn from their own backgrounds. It's really important that we give students that opportunity. The second thing is listening. A lot of people think that debating is just standing up and giving a monologue, but we're all about dialogue, discussion, and of course debate at the Literific. We think that it's very important that listening is a key part of debating, something that people might not recognize, that people aren't just going up and essentially speaking for 7 minutes at a brick wall, but instead that they're listening to what each other has to say. And we think that that's something that's incredibly important in such like a divisive and polarizing political climate today. And then finally as well, we may be the oldest society on campus, but we're all about discussing the incredibly relevant issues of the day. And we think that there's no issue more prevalent right now at the moment than this emerging hate crime legislation, which brings me on to our debate. This House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. So before we get started, I'm just going to explain the rules, and then we're going to do a vote of prior opinion. So we have our proposition here, 3 speakers, and we have our opposition, another 3 speakers. Each will take it in turn to approach the podium and to give a speech for 7 minutes. The first minute and last minute of their speeches are protected time, which is indicated by our bell. Professor, would you mind ringing the bell for us over there, please? There we go, thank you. That means that means the 5 minutes in between are a chance for the other side of the debate to interject and challenge speakers on their points while they're speaking with a POI. That is a point of information. We like to keep our POIs nice and short to give the speaker plenty of time, so this will be 15 seconds maximum, and then once the speaker has either declined a POI or accepted the POI, other speakers must then wait 15 seconds before they can offer another POI. So those are the rules of our debate. I must say as well that this discussion is not just to be had on the stage. We will be giving you as members of the audience an opportunity after the debate to pitch questions to our panel. And finally, well, first of all, I'd like to thank as well our guest chair, Professor Kevin Brown, and his amazing speech earlier. And the only thing that needs to be done before we start our exciting debate is a vote of prior opinion. So this is your chance to express your opinion on the motion as it stands before you hear our speakers. So, as I said, the motion is this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. So can I have all those who wish to vote for the proposition who believe hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose to raise their hands, please? Okay. Okay, so that is 48. Can I have all those in the opposition? So all those who do believe that hate crime legislation is fit for purpose to raise their hands, please. And considerably easier to count. Okay, that is 3. And then can I finally have all those who would like to abstain from the motion to raise their hands, please? Okay, so that is 4. So the results of our vote of prior opinion, we have 48 for the proposition, 3 for the opposition, and 4 for abstentions. So the proposition carries it. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Kevin Brown, who is my fellow co-chair, to introduce our panel and then make a start to the debate. Thank you.
I'm a bit jealous that I didn't get a gown, but and I should say that as an undergraduate student, I was never brave enough to do this. So I really admire the fact that they're here today, and helping to bring alive this important subject. Okay, and in terms of the rules, of course, it'll be Daniel. It'll be guiding us. But so we have the 3 for the proposition, 3 for the opposition. We have Beth, Lee, and James. For their proposition. The opposition, we have Florence, Divya, and Rosa. And so we'll kick off, and I'll return to my seat. But I believe it's going to be Beth joining us first. Is that right? Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here today. My name is Beth, and I'm here today to open the case for the proposition on the motion, this House believes hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. This debate is incredibly topical now, with new legislation likely to be tabled and debated in the Northern Irish Assembly this year, but also with hate crime being on the rise in Northern Ireland, this year being dubbed as the Year of Hate, at least in the BBC. And this idea of the Year of Hate underscores our entire argument. We are not here today to argue that hate crime legislation should not be a thing. We are completely supportive of legislation that effectively tackles hate and actually protects the peoples it claims to. What we are saying is that the laws currently in place to address this problem are ineffective, incomplete, and ultimately unfit for the role they are meant to serve. Now, to begin, what exactly is a hate crime? According to UK law, a hate crime is any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice towards an individual based on certain protected characteristics. These are race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and transgender identity. The purpose of hate crime legislation is to acknowledge the greater harm caused by prejudice-motivated crime, not just to individuals, but to the entire community, and to provide legal tools to ensure these crimes are recognized, prosecuted, and punished accordingly. So how come we are in the Year of Hate? Hate crime legislation laws in Northern Ireland are significantly behind the rest of the UK. The current framework is built on the Criminal Justice Order 2004, which is, fun fact, older than me, where a sentence can be increased if the offence is found to be aggravated by hostility based on race, based on the protected characteristics. However, and this is key, they're not a separate criminal offence. Unlike in England and Wales, where hate crime is a standalone crime, in Northern Ireland, the hate element is simply a factor in sentencing. This means it can be often and is ignored, downplayed, or dropped as part of a trial. So say, for example, someone is in a race-based motivated attack. The offence is the attack itself, not the racial kind of prejudice behind it, and oftentimes is not prosecuted as part of it. So it does not go down as a hate crime, but rather just an assault or whatever. So in 2020, the Independent Hate Crime Legislation Review, led by Judge Desmond Marinan, concluded that Northern Ireland's hate crime laws is not fit for purpose and called for significant reform. 5 years later, the hate is at a record level. The new legislation tabled at Stormont takes its findings into account, better late than never, I suppose, but as it stands alone, current legislation is completely ineffective. And again, I've since then managed to finish my junior cert, leaving cert, and I'm now in college, so long time between that. So, and then, even where the law does provide protection, it is rarely applied effectively. The Public Prosecution Service reports that hate crime cases in Northern Ireland have a very low conviction rate, and when prosecutions do occur, the hate motivation is often not pursued, as I mentioned. In fact, prosecutors often rely on general offences like assault or criminal damage, leaving out the hate element altogether. But why is this important? If the crime is successfully prosecuted, why does it matter that the hate element is left out? Victims are denied justice that recognizes the full extent of their experience, and communities lose faith in the legal system's ability to protect them, as the underlying issue from that hate is not fully dealt with, or from that crime. In 2023, for instance, over 1,200 hate incidents were reported to the PSNI, but only a small fraction resulted in prosecutions where the hate motivation was recognized or sentenced. This isn't a problem of enforcement, it's a sign that the legislation itself lacks clarity and power needed to hold perpetrators accountable. And yet, when a hate crime is prosecuted, can be prosecuted, police and prosecutors often fail to apply them. The Marinan Review found widespread confusion among police officers, prosecutors, and even judges on how to identify and pursue these crimes. Many frontline officers do not receive adequate training, and therefore little consistency on how these crimes are recorded or flagged. In practice, this means that two identical incidents, say an assault motivated by homophobia, might be treated entirely differently depending on who the reporting officer is. One case might be investigated as a hate crime, and the other might not. This kind of inconsistency damages public trust and makes justice feel hollow. One of the main reasons for hate crime legislation is that it sends a powerful societal message that hate will not be tolerated, and that attacks on one community are attacks on us all. But the laws now are unclear, inconsistent, and inconsistently enforced, and full of loopholes that do not send the message. Instead, they send the opposite, that some victims count more than others, that prejudice can be overlooked, and that justice is optional. Northern Ireland already suffers from a lack of faith in the police and justice system. There are already struggles by groups to go to police forces in the first place. Their experience should not be marred by more ineffective policing and confusion by law enforcement about what the law actually is. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not against the idea of hate crime legislation. But the motion is not about the ideal, it's about the reality. And the reality is, in Northern Ireland, the legislation is outdated, incomplete. It is applied inconsistently and misunderstood by those meant to enforce it, and fails to provide justice for victims or deter future harm. In short, it's not fit for purpose. But what is the answer? Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. The legislation in Stormont is a bright spot in this year of hate. With effective legislation in the future, with a clearer definition of a hate crime that allows it to be dealt with properly, and acknowledgement that the hate crime is a serious social harm, so many of the issues that I discussed above can be dealt with. Not completely, of course. There is still systemic issues to be dealt with, but what Northern Ireland needs right now is something hopeful, and that something is closer than we think. I thank you for listening, and I beg you to propose.
Okay, then I invite Florence to the podium.
So, I'd like to say well done to Beth for her amazing speech. I'd also like to consider summer 2024. So during this time, there were riots in cities across the UK, Cardiff, London, Belfast, of course. Australia had also issued travel warnings for citizens visiting the UK. For me personally, I had gotten my first car sorted, so I was ready to drive. Riots, they weren't really on my mind. But to be honest, I still very much remember the warnings I'd gotten from my mum to avoid going outside. Although I wanted to show off to my friends how much of a great driver I was, I'm not, I also understood that it was a really dangerous time to be out. Since then, I've also realized that something very important came out of these riots. A realization that yes, our government is trying its best to prevent something like this ever happening again. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Florence, and today me and my team would like to oppose the House's belief that current hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. We believe that it is. So I also want to clarify what it is exactly that we mean by hate crimes. Offenses which are motivated by hostility on the basis of race, religion, including sectarianism, and age. To go back on the Southport riots specifically, the crackdown was strong, unexpectedly so. Since July 29, 2024, the police had made 1,840 arrests, of which 1,103 were charged. The Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Parkinson, confirmed on August 2024 that the first charges of riot had been authorized, and this means that, under Section 1 of the 1986 Public Order Act, rioters could be punished with a fine or up to 10 years of imprisonment. Also, Part 3 of the Public Order Act specifically addresses racial hatred, noting that a person is guilty of an offense if they use threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior through which racial hatred is likely to be stirred up. The Sentencing Act of 2020 also requires courts to treat racial hostility as an aggravating factor and thus increase the sentence for any conviction where it is proven. Thus, if we look at the case of David Wilkinson, he was a part of the Southport riots, he would be charged with racially aggravated criminal damage and violent disorder due to attacking a car containing 3 Romanian men. He would receive one of the longest sentences, being jailed for 6 years. Additionally, the reaction to the riots brought about a new precedent for punishing those who had encouraged hate crimes on social media. Jordan Parler was sentenced to 20 months in jail for a Facebook post calling users to attack a hotel housing asylum seekers. Yes, initially the police service were not prepared, but it's clear that they reacted with to implement frameworks to ensure that these people would be punished by law. So how can the proposition argue then that hate crime legislation is inefficient when this clearly depicts it working in action? In the specific context of NI, even while there's no specific hate crime legislation by name, this does not mean that I can go and incite violence on whoever I want just because they're of a different sexual orientation or race. I believe that there are still measures in place to prevent hate crimes and to punish those who commit them. Indeed, the current legislation we have in place does provide strong legal protections and is fit for purpose. Under Article 2 of the Criminal Justice Order 2004, there is provision for enhanced sentences when offenses are aggravated by hostility on racial, religious, sexual orientation, or disability grounds. The legislation that is there is not just symbolic, but can also hold real value and real protection. This is clear during the 2006 trial of Johnson and White, who were found guilty of attacking a victim in Enniskillen. The attack was proven to be an example of sectarian hostility, which led to harsher sentencing, with both men getting 3 years in jail. Also, what does one count to be the purpose of legislation? Is it solely to punish the offender, or should it also entail the victim receiving proper help? Legislation here promotes collaboration to ensure that the process is sensitive to the victim and that they are also victim-centered. To say that legislation is fit for purpose means to not only prevent crimes, but to also support the victim, who is definitely going through a very difficult time. So the PSNI is a key partner in the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, or the HCAS, advocating for victim empowerment. This was confirmed during Hate Crime Awareness Week 2025. So the HCAS and the PSNI depicted how the system would work and how they would work together to ensure that the victim was the center of it all, not just the offender. So Rosa will also further address how we need to address the root issues behind hate crimes. So during this week, the PSNI and the HCAS had shown victims being guided through the justice process and reassuring them that their cases would be taken seriously and that they were listened to. They do have a voice. In line with legislation and a duty to protect citizens and victims of hate crimes, this is what a fit-for-purpose system looks like. So let me make it clear. Legislation can never be perfect. It can never fully prevent any and all hate crimes from happening. But I do strongly believe that it is fit for purpose currently, and it does allow people like me, my friends, my family, my community to roam the streets safely without a constant fear that we would become the next BBC headline as a nameless statistic in a hate crime report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we welcome Lee for the proposition to the podium.
Mr. President, esteemed Chair and Professor, guests and members, my name is Lee Walker and I appear for the proposition that hate crime legislation is not fit for purpose. While some in the opposition may try to direct you to the noble pursuits of the legislation, that's inconsequential to the motion. We're all united here that hate crime is wrong. I am a Newton Abbey resident, so I'm well used to our tendencies. I'm also a photojournalist, so the PSNI regard me as a liability, likely to get caught up while trying to get photos. I'm also a scout leader who has had to cancel nights due to the riots in Newton Abbey. And this is kids that are not able to receive scout values being taught to them. That of belief, care, integrity, respect and cooperation, all of which would go so far in helping to prevent hate crime. Florence asks, what is the point of legislation? I have a different answer: to uphold the rule of law. And whilst legislation admittedly cannot be perfect despite legislators' and drafters' intents, it can uphold the rule of law. We must look at the purpose of the legislation. The legislation's intent is to create an offence that is aggravated in some regard either during sentencing or during charge. This introduces the question of, well, what is hate? As we've already highlighted, this is vague legislation. This is vague intent. We have some kind of vague estimate on what a hate crime bill or hate crime act would look like in Northern Ireland. We have the, the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act, which Section 1 provides at the time of committing an offence or immediately before or after doing so, the offender demonstrates malice and ill will. Well, what is that malice and ill will? Well, I hate to point it out, but crime is very rarely motivated through love. It is a matter of, as any time we involve crime, we automatically bring into effect a person's right to liberty, a person's right to freedom from inhumane and degrading treatment, and no punishment without law. These are all European Convention rights that must be engaged anytime we deal with crime. We also bring in the rule of law, which Lord Bingham helpfully summarises. Well, helpfully. I'm a law student, so he didn't helpfully summarise it. Give me more work to do. The law must be accessible, intelligible, clear, predictable, and it must be made on discretion and fairness. Hate crime legislation only serves to obfuscate the law, unfortunately. The meaningless void that is hate only serves to surrender power from the legislature and into the hand of judges. And while some may say judges are wonderful, judges are great, they know the law, they know how to apply the law. Well, it leads to huge inconsistency interpretations. The BNF law student or professional among us will be in court offences, which good luck trying to understand those. Herring admitted that there is no hard and fast rule. This is because of the statutory term more than merely preparatory, which judges just don't, I struggle to interpret at times, and unfortunately I see hate crime going this way. Let us remember the noble pursuits of the first Parliamentary Council, Heaton, who highlighted that due to the evolution of ledge.gov, around 2 to 3 million people go on to the parliamentary maintained network ledge.gov every month. He highlights that there is not just a need for law, but a need for good law. He calls for drafting to be clearer and a better overall design of statute. This only serves to highlight that the obfuscation in the current hate crime legislation makes it not fit for purpose. It's also our duty to defendants. We're not here only to protect the victim. Of course we must protect the victim, but we must also protect the defendant, because a defendant is not always necessarily guilty. The legislation offends a principle of legal fairness. While the intention of such laws is to protect vulnerable groups, it could create a form of legal discrimination, where crimes targeting certain groups are treated more seriously than others. This is a byproduct of the intention, and therefore it's not a byproduct and contrary to the intention, and therefore not fit for use. In the purpose of driving down hate-related incidents, you create a system that prioritises some communities over others. In a world where we've witnessed what Ballymena, Clough, Bangor, Ards, Direction have also said, you know, we have this accusation that there's a two-tiered criminal justice system. We've watched it just there this week with Shandon Park, the road signs, where the taking away of part of that road sign was rightly labelled a hate-related incident. However, equally, the constant graffitiing of Londonderry signs were not. The graffitiing of signs, welcome to occupied Ireland, is not labelled hate crime at times. This creates inconsistency. This creates a subjectivity that is not appropriate for criminal law. I do wish to sum up briefly here just. Over 60% of victims of hate crimes don't want the law to come down like a heavy hammer on top of perpetrators. They prefer victim-led restorative justice. Those are not my words, those are the words of Judge Manigan, who, if you will recall, is an instigator for the push for further hate crime legislation, but also highlighting the inconsistencies in the current legislation. As a tradesman at heart, I must say not every tool is fit for every job. I cannot use a sledgehammer to precisely cut a piece of glass. Instead, I use a glacier knife. This legislation, in pursuit of a noble aim, misses, asking the criminal justice system to bend to its will and asking judges to break glass whilst equipping them with a sledgehammer. And with that, I commend the motion.
Thank you to Lee, who I recall asking me difficult questions in criminal law tutorials last year, so that clearly his debating skills were paying off there. We now move to our fourth speaker, a second one for the opposition, and it's Divya.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was walking past Fountain Street a few days ago, a walk I've done thousands of times, as I'm sure many of you have. You know, you walk past College Street Cafe, there's Savers on the left, Boots in the distance, you know the works. What was different about my walk this time was that as I walked past a nail salon that I always do, I heard a commotion coming from the inside. I approached the store, and to my absolute horror, what I saw before me was a group of teenagers thrashing the place. Now, it is necessary for the story for me to mention that the owner of this nail salon was an Asian woman, and I saw her standing in a corner, helpless, feebly, her voice shaking as she said she wanted to call the police, and to which one of the brutes looked at her and said, "You're not going to do anything, you Chinese beep." I'm censoring myself so poor Daniel doesn't get a heart attack. Now, I am ashamed to say that I stood there stunned in the midst of all of this. It all happened so fast. The next moment, they were out the door and gone. I just witnessed a hate crime on this random Wednesday on my way to Boots trying to get toothpaste. This is the last thing I expected to see. But of course, I snapped out of my daze and I approached the woman and I asked her if she was okay. She looked at me with a look that I can only describe as tired and defeated as she said that this happens all the time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, sit with me for a moment as we let this sink in about how dehumanized she must have felt on the premises of her own business in her own town. But of course, my purpose here today isn't to tell you that hate crime is bad. Of course, we all know hate crime is bad. But my purpose here is that I want to highlight in this debate that this poor woman didn't go through what she went through because of a failure of legislation, but rather than the system around her failed to bring that law to life. Northern Ireland does have hate crime laws. Like, we do know that the Criminal Justice Number 2 Northern Ireland Order 2004 allows judges to impose enhanced sentences when prejudice is identified as a motivating factor.
this is something proposition concedes to when they verbatim quote in their own speeches that the problem is then inconsistency in the way the law is then enforced, and that's where the problem lies. The most significant point we get from prop is that the law can be vague, but when I say that even if we acknowledge that this might be true, a level of vagueness allows for flexibility, and depending on sensitivities and different circumstances, this can prove to be beneficial. And is this something that is fit to say that the entire law as a whole is unfit? We don't think so on side op. We believe that what is the point of advocating constantly for legislation change when no matter what, if the translation of that law into society is broken, nothing ever really changes? At the end of the day, hate crimes are still going to happen because of a lack of reporting from victims, because of fear or distrust that it'll be enforced in a way that will actually bring change, and they therefore feel isolated and powerless, and the fact that there is still prevalent stigmas against minority groups in society. The question now is then if not reforming legislation, how do we fix this? How do we really make sure that victims like that nail salon owner actually get what they need help with? We believe that first and foremost, there needs to be active initiative taken to rebuild trust between minority communities and the police. Because it's not that hate crime law is unfit, it's that those who need it most don't feel like it's accessible to them. The salon owner didn't call the police, and she is not the only one that would have done that. Many victims fear reporting. They fear language barriers, the cultural differences, or the inaction that may possibly happen, and the sting of neglect that comes with that. The solution is not to change the laws or more laws. It's about fostering trust. We need to create a culture of officers that's more than intimidating enforcers with flashy badges and like holsters at their hips, but actually like sensitive allies to the communities that they've sworn to protect. Sure.
Is it not true that while we can also create an environment where officers and constables understand the nuances of such an issue, we can also push for harsher legislation like is currently going through the Assembly, which does punish hate crimes in a way that is more efficient?
Even if we acknowledge that to be true, I think you still need to meet your burden of proof to say why exactly the current legislation is so bad that you are deeming it completely unfit. I think we are saying now that the main issue lies in the way it actually translates to society, the way it's enforced, and that's what we need to focus on fixing. Now, we can go a step further, in fact. We can say that there needs to be regular audits of like hate crime reporting within police systems to ensure accountability within the police force. Because it's the moment that hate crime complaints are not followed up with, that's when you erode public trust, that's when the system is undermined, that's when you've lost the trust of the people that you've sworn to protect. We want the victims to feel like the law is something they can actually grasp and use as a shield, rather than something that's so distant and almost out of reach. Now, after this incident happened, I was talking about it to everyone I knew, and what shocked me was the number of people that of course sympathized and understood that this was something that was tragic that had happened, but they would follow it up with well, you know how teenagers are, or they'll grow out of it. This was something that was deeply shocking to me. It made me deeply reflect on how so many people undermine the seriousness of hate crimes and dismiss it as youth mischief, which is why public awareness campaigns is so important, why community education programs are so important, why events like this that you have all attended tonight are so important, because the law can punish hate, but it's only through improving communities' ideologies, like improving systemic beliefs, which is when we can address the root of the problem and prevent it from happening in the very first place. This looks like introducing school-based anti-prejudice programs, cross-country youth programs, launching media and social campaigns to show the real impact of hate crimes and victims and communities. It means encouraging bystander intervention training so people can know how to safely intervene. So we prevent people like me who stood to the side, because we need to fix this plague that is the bystander effect. And we need to not leave the most vulnerable left feeling even more vulnerable. It looks like community-based support networks for victims, where victims stop feeling isolated and powerless even after reporting. This means that we can fund community response teams or hate crime support hubs where victims can actually access legal advice, counseling, translation programs to help them feel more at home and help them feel like they can actually enact some sort of justice. This looks like actual initiatives being taken to make sure victims know that they aren't alone, that the society they live in is willing to stand up and defend them. As I conclude my speech today, ladies and gentlemen, I think of that woman sweeping the broken glass and spilt nail polish, feeling like her human dignity was stripped from her, feeling like the access to that legislation that was set out to protect her was so out of reach that she didn't even try. let's not distract ourselves by telling ourselves that we need to fix the laws. Let's all take some accountability upon ourselves, our community, our police force to do better and to uphold the principle of the law in itself. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
What a powerful story that shaped the narrative there. We now move on to the proposition again and to James.
Good morning, Carlick, August, Octoran, Daniel, ladies and gentlemen, Akarja. When the United Kingdom first introduced aggravated hate crime laws, it did so under a noble premise, that hate would count for more, that prejudice, whether based on race, religion, sexuality, disability, or any other identity category, would not be dismissed as a footnote to crime, but recognised as a poison that corrodes communities. Yet, for all its intent, the current legislation is simply not fit for purpose. The principle is sound, sure, but the practice, the reality on Britain's streets, online spaces, and in its courtrooms falls tragically short. Let's start with the facts. According to the Home Office, there were 137,558 hate crimes recorded in England and Wales in 2024 to 2025, a 2% rise on the previous year. Religious hate crimes reached 7,000 offences, an increase of 3%. These are not just numbers, they are stories of people being harassed, being spat on, attacked, or vilified simply because of who they are. If the system were working, we might expect such figures to fall. Instead, hate crime is climbing, and public faith in the system is falling. The same official statistics reveal that only around 40% of victims said that they were satisfied with how the police handled their case, down sharply from 55% in the year before. So what's going on? The first issue is underreporting. The Crime Survey for England and Wales estimates roughly 176,000 hate incidents occur each year, far more than police figures capture. Many victims stay silent, convinced that nothing will come of reporting, or worse, that they'll be dismissed, doubted, or re-traumatized by the process. For marginalised groups who already feel alienated, this lack of trust is devastating. Second, the law's definitions are narrow, they're rigid, they are outdated. Many acts of hatred simply do not meet the technical thresholds for prosecution. The shouting of slurs in the street, the vile torrent of abuse online, the subtle intimidation that says, "You don't belong here." These incidents cause real harm, yet they often slip through the cracks because they don't fit neatly into a 20th century legal box. Yes, I'll accept.
Mike? Yep. If you just use the mic.
So do you then concede that the issue is with enforcing these laws rather than the legislation itself?
No, because I believe that two things can be true at once. I believe that while we can strengthen laws, there also needs to be better engagement, better education about this issue. While the laws are not perfect, and neither are the other initiatives, two things can be true at once. We can strengthen both. And simply the fact is, legislation is often supplementary to initiatives, and I believe in both to fixing this vile problem. There's also an inconsistency in how hate crime is recorded, prosecuted, or sentenced. And it often depends less on the act itself than whether it's reported and who handles it. One police force might take a robust stance. Another might dismiss it as antisocial behaviour. The result, a postcode lottery for justice. And underpinning it all is a problem of data. We cannot fix what we fail to measure properly. Without consistent, transparent reporting of all hate-motivated incidents, including so-called non-crime hate incidents, policymakers are simply fighting blindfolded. So what needs to change? We must first broaden the scope of protection. Hate doesn't always come with a punch or a smashed window. It comes through words, through exclusion, through the drip feed of online abuse that erodes people's safety and belonging. Our laws should recognise that. Next, we need consistent national training. Every police constable, prosecutor and judge should understand how to identify hate motivation and how to support victims appropriately. Cultural competence is not a luxury, it is a necessity for justice. Indeed, as has been previously mentioned today, the PSNI has seen over 2,300 hate crimes recorded in just the last year. These numbers are both shocking and sad. And while I am glad that this week we are focusing on tackling hate crime and the police service is encouraging people to speak up, we need our legislation to reflect the public's enthusiasm for fighting this poison and protecting our people. We also need independent oversight, a body that ensures hate crimes are recorded and prosecuted consistently across the UK. Indeed, and here in Northern Ireland, we do not have such protections that exist in the mainland, with such current legislation working slowly through the Assembly, and I note the word slowly. The fundamental fact is that equality before the law must not depend on geography. But tougher laws alone won't solve this, and indeed, Divya, we recognise this fact. We need stronger community partnerships, we need greater victim support and more restorative justice. Perpetrators should face real consequences, but also real understanding of the harm that they have done. Restorative justice, when appropriate, can turn offenders into allies, not repeat offenders. We must say with one voice that hate in any form is intolerable, not only in our conscience, but in our law. The UK's hate crime framework was once progressive. Today, it's a shield full of holes. Noble in principle, but inadequate in protection. It needs reform, expansion, and above all, courage. Because legislation is not just a legal instrument, it is a moral declaration of who we are. And if we as a society, if we, everyone here, truly believe in equality and dignity, then our laws must not just punish hate, they must prevent it. Thank you.
Gormayagat, James, we now move to our final speaker for the opposition, and we invite Rosa to the podium.
The prosecution would have you believe that issues within the current system can be blamed on our current legislation, rather than on inefficiencies within the system itself. They have brought up, Beth, how the current legislation can be and is ignored, agreeing with Divya's speech, the issues with enforcement. She brought up a lack of training. She said the legislation was incomplete and full of loopholes, but offered no examples of specific changes which could be made or specific problems. Lee, the supposed vague legislation with vague intent. I would disagree. It is clearly defined, which I believe the first speaker of both the opposition and the proposition went into. Hate is based on your religious, your racial, your sexuality, your identity, and which is all laid out within the law.
Be away.
Could you use the mic, please, James?
Sorry.
Yep.
If it was such an efficient law, then why would the Justice Minister be proposing new legislation to tackle such an issue?
That is a band-aid, and it is distracting us from the real issues. James outlined statistics, how people were unsatisfied with how the police handled their cases. Again, the system is the issue. He also mentioned how the law is currently narrow and rigid, which contradicts the previous speaker, who said it was vague. Can we please make up our minds? It is so easy to point at problems and issues, statistics and case studies, to identify at the basis level that there is something that needs to change. This behavior, this naysaying, which is akin to your friend who you invite over to watch a movie, and then when she shoots down all your ideas, she does not offer any of her own. This solves nothing, nada, zilch, and it is the belief of myself and my fellow members of the opposition that not only are they being insane Debbie Downers, they have identified the wrong target for their ire. It is not the fault of the legislation that hate crimes are on the rise, that the current internet culture perpetuates and exacerbates the radical, the extremist, the conspiracy theorist, that it is human nature to find someone below us to blame for our own current problems. Would we say our laws against, say, murder aren't fit for purpose because human beings still murder each other? No, we would not. It is a patently absurd take. I don't oppose this motion out of some naivety, some misplaced belief that since these laws were put in place, life is all cupcakes and rainbows. That violent crimes are suddenly no longer racially, religiously, homophobically motivated. The racist riots in Belfast last summer, followed by the brutal attacks on migrant families this June, attest to that fact. These are terrible, horrific acts that demand an immediate solution. Even in my personal life, do I wish that I didn't get called certain slurs, which I will not be repeating here, while waiting in line for Kremlin? That in my previous relationship, we didn't have to avoid public displays of affection, which straight couples got to revel in for fear of getting jumped on the way home? That the members of the Palestine Action group chat of Queens didn't have to ask each other for advice on whether it's even safe for them to wear their cuffiyas around the campus? Yes, of course. Do I blame the laws banning these acts for the acts themselves? No. And to solve this, the proposition seems to think we should just write new legislation, draft an ever so slightly differently worded law. That'll fix it, yeah. We haven't addressed any of the root causes of this issue or looked into how we can better enforce this legislation, as Divya so clearly outlined. But our new legislation is the answer. I promise this time it will be different, guys. No. No, 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 no. What we need is a targeted, systematic approach addressing the root causes of this hatred. I have spoken to so many girls who feel, whether correctly or not from personal experience or internal biases, that they are more likely to experience sexual offenses and sexual threats from immigrant men of different cultures, which may have different attitudes towards women. If we brush these fears aside, if we neglect to address their fears of potential immigrant vetted oversights, if we neglect to educate them on their own internal biases, which this is rooted in, we risk radicalizing these women. Similar to this, if we neglect to address the belief of so many women, particularly in the UK in the current climate, that there is an inherent danger to them from people assigned men at birth, rather than a failure in the way our society has raised the men who would do harm to women, we will never be able to address the rampant hatred towards trans women in this country. On top of all that, social media is constantly pushing dangerous, radical ideas and views towards especially our young people. People who may feel helpless in their own lives, people who want someone to blame for the current state of the world they see waiting for them. The easiest way to get someone angry is to give them someone to blame. The more angry we are, the more engaged we are, the longer we are spending on their social media apps. If we neglect to address the rampant misinformation and frankly cult-like state of so many internet spaces in the modern day, we are facilitating this hatred. What we need is a targeted, two-pronged approach, one of crime prevention as well as crime control, one that addresses the root of the hatred and enforces our current legislation instead of wasting time and resources on what amounts to pretty words. Current hate crime legislation is perfectly fit for purpose. It criminalizes hate crimes, as has been gone over and over in the previous speeches, to a greater extent than regular crimes, and which, when used correctly, criminals who are motivated by hate get more significant sentence. This is understandably disappointingly, as we would of course all prefer to eradicate the problem entirely, the most we can ask of a law or a piece of legislation. From there, the onus is on our police forces to help enforce this legislation, and on our judges to follow and support this legislation, and on our schools to educate our children on those who are different from them so that we can address the root cause of this issue. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much. That was an excellent response, thinking on your feet when asked a question. Well done. And I think now, if Daniel keeps me right here, but I think it's now over to the audience to field questions. And there may be, Michael will keep us right. Is there roving microphones? Yeah. Oh, there we go. So if you want to raise your hand, then we'll send Michael over to you. There we go. First question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for a very interesting debate. I would like to pose my question to the young lady who was last on stage. I think you said this, the young man asked a question and you said that he was avoiding the issue. The issue is not the legislative law, the issue is the system. So how would you tackle and change the system?
Well, personally, I believe that we should use information campaigns, education in schools, community outreach where we can get together people of different beliefs, of different religions, of different ethnic and religious backgrounds to show that we are all humans and there's no need to hate each other, as is pushed on the internet in today's world. We need to stop the isolation and the radicalization of the people in our communities so that we can prevent the issue at its root. And also we need better training for our police officers and better information for the common people on what their rights are.
Thank you. And do we have another question?
Yeah.
Oh, follow-up question. Yes, go ahead.
I want to follow up on your answer. You've suggested all those changes, however, and you mentioned police officers and institutions who are part of the system that you are trying to change with your new information. So how do you think the system will respond to you trying to change it? Because you are not introducing anything new here. This has been tried for centuries in terms of changing the system. So I'm trying to see what your new ideas are for addressing those systematic changes that are required. Don't you do that. Don't do that. We're underrepresented, so you won't
Of
mind if
course.
I ask a few more questions.
Would anyone on the opposition like to
yeah,
address that?
I'm very happy to answer again now. Well, I'm going to be so real with you. I am a first year. I don't know the world that well, and I have looked into this topic too far past my little research session last night. So I don't have any specific, campaigns and solutions to hand. But I think that there are ways to do it, and I think that the issue is in pushing the resources into that area and a targeted approach.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Proposition response.
Yes, proposition to respond.
So I completely agree with what the question, the point of the question. What was highlighted there, that the police and the system and the justice system are not equipped. Well, Joe does equip them: concise and effective legislation. The police and the judiciary can only act on the basis of legislation, otherwise they are acting ultra vires. So we need to be giving them better tools. If we want hate crime to come down, we give them better tools.
And we have another question from over here.
I'd just like to hear some people's thoughts. We've been dealing with a recent incident around sort of Donegal Pass, sort of Shaftesbury Square, where it was a group of young people actually hitting people with water balloons. So, to talk about the complexities, is it antisocial behaviour, is it a hate crime? So the kids hit 20 people with water balloons and 4 from an ethnic minority background. Is that a hate crime, or is it antisocial behaviour? And I think that sort of young case there highlights the complexities within that from a policing point of view then as well. So just like to hear people's thoughts.
If I could still hear, if you're happy, yes, they'll not object anyway. This is one of the points I was trying to address. There's an inherent vagueness within the law that needs addressing. What is the difference between a hate-motivated crime and a victim of a crime who just so happens to be a member of one of the protected categories? This leaves people in a very uncomfortable position when addressing anything. So this is what I mean. We need to be giving people better tools, not only so that people can understand the law, but also so that our systems and the tools of the state effectively are in a better place to address incidents like you're talking about. Because I'm sure PPS are sitting there going, what do we do now? Because as you highlight yourself, there's no intent. You know, we don't know the intent there. Where do we sit? You know, is it happenstance, or is it a derived and deliberate motive?
Thank you. Would the opposition like to offer any comment?
Just to respond, I don't think legal frameworks of the law is necessarily unfamiliar with when it comes to discussing intent. I think the concept of intent is super ingrained in like so many areas of the law. I think in criminal law, it is literally a necessary aspect that we have to consider when it comes to determining what kind of sentence someone gets. You have to determine the intent. I think police enforcers, I think judges all have the tools necessary to determine the intent that goes behind an action. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that laws are unfit because it's hard to determine intent. Like, yes, it's hard, but that's sort of the point, and that's why it's up to them to interpret it accordingly. But it's definitely within legal frameworks, and the law does deal with dealing with intent constantly in many other areas, if that makes sense.
We've time for one, probably last question.
Thank you guys for creative, thought-provoking input and for the time you've given to research your arguments. Divya, my question is for you, please. Thank you for sharing, a very stirring experience of witnessing, what happened with the shop owner. And my question really to you would be, I suppose to anyone on your team, your position, when you argue against the need for changing legislation, what do you foresee as an alternative to serving as a deterrent? Because while we talk about implementation of current existing legislation, and we all know that there are a number of incidents throughout the UK where teenage children are on the rampage in similar, situations like you described to us, Divya. And when they are faced with any consequence of, perhaps calling the police, the response, the rhetoric is, you can't touch me. And that's obviously because hate crime legislation is broken. So what would be your response in saying, how do we present a deterrent if current legislation isn't being implemented and engaged with effectively enough to lower the incidents that we are seeing?
Thank you so much for the question. So to answer, I think first and foremost, a sort of policy of zero tolerance needs to be adopted. I don't think the problem necessarily lies within legislation itself, because that implies that the law in itself is worded in a way that's flawed or anything like that. It's more the focus of my speech, and I think the focus of my team as a whole, was to address the fact that the way it's enforced is then maybe the issue, or the ideologies within society is then the issue, and that's the root. So I think that's something we want to focus on, because I think the way I understood this debate was that we need to pinpoint where exactly we want to direct our focus. Is it that we want to reform legislation, or do we want to improve on the grassroots level community building things and enforcement, improving sensitivities within the police force? When it comes to the whole ideology of like how a lot of teenagers feel like there's just no consequences for them and that nothing can touch them, I think that's where the reformations that I propose in my speech kind of comes to fruition, about how you need more in-school programs to really harp the zero tolerance policy, really engage with how, address children and tell them that it's okay if someone looks different from you or acts different from you. They're still human. There's still no need to hate them. It starts from young. I think that's where it needs to begin. And that's how we can kind of foster change rather than shifting our attention to blaming laws specifically. Does that answer your question?
Yes or no?
Okay.
Could they not coexist? Could it not be yes or no. It does answer my question, and then it doesn't equally. Could they not coexist? Could the two not coexist? The need for an improvement on current legislation, as well as education programs that help implement the legislation on a wider scale and community basis, grassroots level? Could they not coexist?
I'm willing to concede that it can coexist. It's just for specifically the context of today's debate. It's more so what do we want to focus on more. I think in a broader societal sense, sure it can, but specifically in a debate context, if we have to hyper focus on one or the other, then the question is where do we want to shift our attention to?
Would proposition like to respond?
Yes, the best deterrent is jail time, unfortunately. We wouldn't be paying our, it used to be our boys in blue, but was it dark green now, I think? Yeah, bottle green, yeah. Yeah, dark green. The opposition summarised legislation as pretty words. Well, those pretty words put people in prison. So, as you completely point out, they can coexist. We can stand here and say that society is failing minorities. We can stand here and say we need to be intervening in community groups, education, housing. We can be doing so much, but equally, we can stand here and say that the current legislation is not fit for use. For whenever those efforts do fail, people are still falling through the cracks. There's creating of ambiguity in law. Two things can coexist.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of our speakers up on stage for what has been an excellent debate, and I think they all deserve a lot of credit for that. Yeah, what's particularly powerful is the things that we all saw from that debate that we had in common, not only that we're united against hate crime, but you'll notice that all the speakers drew on examples that are true to us all in this room, because I'm sure either yourself or someone you know, whether it's your colleague, whether it's your neighbour, whether it's someone in your family or your friend, has suffered from a hate crime incident before, and that's why it's also important that we have people who are able to voice that, who are able to stand up for it, and then we can come together to find a solution, in this fight, to address it and to really tackle it. So I think that that's very important what our speakers have done today, and I'd like to invite Professor Kevin Brown to offer closing remarks before our final vote. Thank you.
Thank you, and I've been so impressed with all six of you. Sorry, no way. It was what I was really particularly impressed with is that you articulated both the argument for why we need the criminal law in this area reformed, why we need new hate crime legislation for those who were the proponents, but the opponents, I thought, illuminated the other key point, and that key point is it's not just law alone that will solve things, that as lawyers we can maybe, our instinct is we'll reform the law and everything will be okay, and that's clearly not the case, and that was teased out very well too. So I'd just like to say huge admiration to all six speakers, and can I give them another round of applause? And I think I now hand back to Daniel again.
And now comes our final part of the first debate. So this is the vote on speaker ability. So it's important to keep in mind that this is not which side you personally agree with more. We are voting on how the speakers presented themselves at the podium. We're also voting on how the rhetoric which was used, the examples that were used, the use of imagery and metaphor, the argument itself, which have been put under a good amount of scrutiny from both sides, the teamwork that was shown throughout both sides of the debate, and then finally the engagement from yourselves as an audience pitching questions, but also from the POIs that were offered throughout the debate. So can I have all those who would like to vote for the proposition on speaker ability, please raise their hands now. Okay, that's 15. And can I have plus three? Yes, very well reminded. I did count. Yep. So that is 18. Thank you, James. And can I have all those who would like to vote for the opposition on speaker ability, please raise their hands now. Okay, so that is 40 for the opposition. And then finally, can I have all those who would like to abstain on the motion of speakability please raise their hand? I believe that's 3. So finally, the results of the vote on speakerability, the opposition take it 40 to 18 on the vote of speakerability. Congratulations. Thank you. And I'd like to invite Mandy back up on the stage to reveal our next segment on the agenda. Thank you.
I'll not make you do another round of applause, but I absolutely thought the standard of debate there was absolutely brilliant. I was going to say many years ago, but it might be generations ago. I was heavily involved in the Queen's Debating Society, and it brings back a lot of memories. And the standard of debate there was just brilliant. In fact, I was a bit mischievous there, and I've just put out a tweet where I tagged the Northern Ireland Assembly and said I'm actually sitting at a debate with a group of young people who I think, in terms of might give you a run for your money. So I'm sure they'll be on to me later going, what were you doing that for? But absolutely brilliant. You have to take every opportunity you can get.